Sitting Bull, the renowned Lakota Sioux leader, stands as a symbol of Native American resistance to U.S. territorial expansion. More than just a figure of defiance, he embodied hope for indigenous peoples across North America. His opposition to American colonialism stemmed from profound cultural, spiritual, and political convictions, making him a formidable adversary in the eyes of the U.S. government. This exploration delves into Sitting Bull's resistance to U.S. expansion, the significance of the Battle of Little Bighorn in Native American history, and why his unyielding stance threatened the United States so directly. At the core of Sitting Bull's resistance lay his deep-rooted bond with the land and a commitment to preserving the Lakota way of life. His opposition was not merely strategic or military, it was profoundly spiritual and cultural. His refusal to surrender Lakota lands represented a stand against the erosion of indigenous sovereignty, the disintegration of native cultures, and the disregard of solemn treaties. Born in 1831 on the Great Plains, Sitting Bull lived during a time when the U.S. government was forcefully advancing westward. Manifest destiny, the belief that the U.S. was divinely destined to span the continent, was not only a political philosophy but was also enforced through military might, threatening the very survival of native tribes across North America. To Sitting Bull and the Lakota Sioux, this expansion was an existential danger. The land was more than just territory. It was sacred, rich with spiritual and cultural significance. Losing it would mean severing ties with their ancestors, their traditions, and their entire way of life. To fully understand why Sitting Bull resisted American expansion, it is essential to consider the worldview of the Lakota people. For the Lakota, the land was not merely a resource to be exploited, but a spiritual foundation that connected them to the earth, animals, and the Creator. To Sitting Bull, the land was sacred, a gift from the Creator to be preserved and protected for future generations. Therefore, his resistance was not just about territorial boundaries, but also a refusal to allow the United States to erase his people's culture, traditions, and identity. Further fueling his resistance were the United States government's broken promises. From the outset, treaties with Native American tribes were often made under duress and were routinely violated once the government had secured what it wanted. For example, the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, correcting the previously mentioned 1851 date, promised the Lakota exclusive rights to vast areas of land in the Great Plains. However, the U.S. government frequently failed to honor the terms of these treaties, allowing settlers to flood into these lands and encroach upon traditional hunting grounds. Sitting Bull viewed these violations not only as injustices, but also as betrayals. To him, the U.S. government's failure to uphold treaties exemplified the corrupt and untrustworthy nature of its promises to Native peoples. This belief in the government's dishonesty, combined with the violence inflicted upon his people, solidified Sitting Bull's determination to resist American expansion. He believed that the future of the Lakota depended on rejecting the government's demands, no matter the consequences. Sitting Bull's refusal to sign subsequent treaties, such as the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1881, was a direct act of defiance against a government he saw as deceitful and destructive. His actions were motivated not just by a desire to protect land, but by an unwavering commitment to safeguard the spiritual integrity and cultural heritage of his people. This steadfast resistance made him a pivotal figure in Native American history and a significant threat to the United States government during a period of aggressive westward expansion. The Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on June 25, 1876, between the U.S. Army and a coalition of Native American tribes led by Sitting Bull, marked a critical moment in the resistance against U.S. expansion. But why was this battle so significant? What made it a turning point in the struggle for Native American sovereignty? The immediate military impact of the Battle of Little Bighorn was a remarkable victory for Native forces. Led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, a unified group of Lakota Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors delivered a decisive defeat to General George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry Regiment. The destruction of Custer's entire command was among the worst military losses in U.S. history. Yet, the significance of this battle goes far beyond its immediate military consequences. It was deeply symbolic. For Native Americans, the victory at Little Bighorn represented a powerful statement of unity and strength in the face of overwhelming odds. It highlighted the ability of indigenous warriors to resist U.S. military forces, even if only temporarily, in defense of their lands and way of life. The battle became a beacon of hope for Native peoples, symbolizing the resilience and courage of tribes who faced relentless pressures from westward expansion. For the United States, however, the defeat at Little Bighorn was a national shock, sparking an intensified campaign against the Plains tribes. In response, the U.S. government mobilized additional military forces, accelerating efforts to subdue Native tribes and confining them to reservations. This shift marked a brutal phase in U.S. Native relations, where the government redoubled its efforts to end Native resistance. Ultimately, the Battle of Little Bighorn was a turning point because it underscored the fierce opposition of Native peoples to losing their land, rights, and cultural heritage. While it was a victory in battle, it also precipitated a harsh crackdown from the U.S. government, leading to the eventual forced relocation of many Native communities and the erosion of their traditional way of life. The legacy of Little Bighorn endures as a symbol of Native American resistance and the profound cost of the United States' westward expansion. For the Lakota and their allies, the victory at Little Bighorn was a powerful declaration of resistance against U.S. military domination. It was a moment of triumph for Native American warriors who, though vastly outnumbered and under-equipped, successfully defeated one of the most formidable armies of the time. This victory sent a clear message. Native Americans were not willing to surrender their land and culture to the U.S. government. However, while it was a victory, it also foreshadowed the challenges that lay ahead. Despite this triumph, the Battle of Little Bighorn marked the beginning of the end for the Lakota and their allies. The U.S. government responded swiftly and forcefully to the defeat, launching a series of retaliatory expeditions to crush Native resistance. In the years that followed, the Lakota were forced onto reservations, and their traditional way of life was systematically dismantled by U.S. military campaigns and federal policies. Although Custer's defeat was empowering for the Lakota, it was ultimately a short-lived victory, symbolizing the peak of Native resistance before the tides of history turned decisively in favor of the U.S. government. The battle thus came to symbolize both the high point of Native American resistance and the beginning of their eventual subjugation. Sitting Bull's leadership, critical to the victory, would eventually lead to his forced exile and tragic death, but his role in the battle ensured that his spirit of resistance would endure in Native American memory. Sitting Bull's defiance posed a unique threat to the U.S. government's goals. His unwavering resistance, rooted in cultural and spiritual convictions, embodied the determination of Native communities to protect their lands and identities, directly opposing the expansionist policies of the United States. Sitting Bull's resistance posed a profound threat to the U.S. government, as it extended beyond military defiance to challenge the spiritual and cultural foundation of American colonization of Native lands. For a government keen on acquiring Native territory and breaking indigenous resistance, Sitting Bull became an obstacle that had to be neutralized. His staunch refusal to sign treaties, his influence over various tribes, and his ability to unite these groups in a common resistance made him an especially formidable figure. To the U.S. government, Sitting Bull embodied Native American defiance, serving as a rallying point that threatened to unify indigenous opposition to American expansion. Sitting Bull's role was not limited to military leadership. He was a respected spiritual figure whose influence galvanized a widespread movement of resistance. His involvement in the ghost dance movement of the late 1880s heightened his threat in the eyes of U.S. authorities. The ghost dance, a spiritual movement promising the restoration of native lands and the resurrection of ancestors, resonated strongly with Native communities facing relentless encroachment. Sitting Bull's spiritual status and endorsement of the ghost dance fueled government fears, as it appeared to inspire a new, collective form of defiance with the potential to incite further uprisings. Sitting Bull's leadership in this movement led to his arrest, which ultimately resulted in his tragic death at the hands of U.S. authorities in December 1890. His assassination was part of a broader effort to suppress the ghost dance and eliminate one of the most powerful symbols of Native resistance. His legacy, however, endured, as he remains a figure of resilience and cultural strength in Native American history. Sitting Bull's refusal to submit to the U.S. government, his role as a unifying leader, and his spiritual influence made him a primary target for government officials. They believed that as long as Sitting Bull remained active in the resistance, Native Americans would continue to oppose U.S. domination. His influence was deemed dangerous because it could inspire more uprisings. Therefore, his arrest and eventual death were not merely acts of suppression, but calculated efforts to extinguish the spirit of resistance he had kindled. One defining decision in Sitting Bull's life was his refusal to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, a pivotal moment that solidified his stance against the U.S. government. To understand this choice, one must consider both the nature of the treaty and Sitting Bull's deeply held beliefs. The Treaty of Fort Laramie was designed to establish peace between the United States and the Lakota Sioux by creating the Great Sioux Reservation and securing Lakota land in the Black Hills. However, the treaty included terms that Sitting Bull and many of his peers found unacceptable. A critical provision required the Lakota to cede significant tracts of land to the U.S. government. Adding to their distrust, the U.S. had a track record of breaking treaties, often pressuring Native communities onto smaller reservations or seizing their lands for mining and railroads once American interests shifted. Sitting Bull's refusal to sign the treaty was rooted in his belief that the Lakota should not be forced to surrender their land. He saw the treaty as another tool of oppression, intended to strip his people of their sovereignty and cultural heritage. His resistance to signing symbolized a broader commitment to preserving Lakota autonomy, land, and identity in the face of relentless U.S. expansion. Sitting Bull's decision not to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie was an act of defiance and a rejection of the legitimacy of a government that had repeatedly broken promises to Native tribes. To him, signing the treaty would have meant surrendering the spiritual and cultural heritage of the Lakota people. By refusing, Sitting Bull reaffirmed his commitment to Native sovereignty and laid the groundwork for continued resistance. Sitting Bull's resistance to American expansion embodied a steadfast defiance against a government determined to erase Native culture, sovereignty, and traditions. His leadership, demonstrated during events like the Battle of Little Bighorn and his support of the Ghost Dance movement, elevated him to a powerful symbol of Native American resistance. His refusal to compromise posed a significant threat to the U.S. government, as it inspired other tribes and challenged the westward expansion plans. While the government ultimately silenced Sitting Bull through arrest and assassination, his legacy endures. He is remembered not only for his military achievements, but also for his profound spiritual connection to the land, his uncompromising stance, and his commitment to his people's survival. Sitting Bull's life continues to inspire Native American movements and activists fighting for land, justice, and recognition. His defiance transcended his time, standing as a lasting challenge to colonial dominance over indigenous peoples and a testament to the enduring struggle for indigenous rights and identity.